As the moving truck pulled up to the curb, Jenna couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the old Victorian house she and her husband had just purchased. Despite its ornate facade and elegant architecture, there was something unsettling about the way the windows seemed to stare down at her, and the way the gnarled branches of the old oak tree twisted like fingers against the sky. But as the movers began to unload box after box, Jenna tried to brush her unease aside. After all, she and her husband had fallen in love with the house at first sight, with its towering ceilings and intricate woodwork. It was the kind of place they had always dreamed of owning, and nothing was going to ruin this moment for them. That is, until the sun began to set. As the sky turned from a brilliant orange to a deep, dark purple, Jenna began to hear strange noises echoing through the house. It started with a faint scratching, like the sound of tiny claws against wood, but quickly grew louder and more insistent. Jenna tried to convince herself it was just the sound of the old house settling, but deep down, she knew it was something more. Then, as she was unpacking her clothes in the bedroom, she saw it. A dark, twisting shadow slinking across the wall. It was like nothing she had ever seen before, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to have a life of its own. Jenna tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat as the shadow loomed closer. From that moment on, Jenna knew there was no denying it. This house was not what it seemed, and whatever dark force inhabited it was not going to let her go. Night after night, Jenna lay awake in bed, listening to the strange noises and watching the dark shadows dance across the walls. She tried to tell her husband, but he just laughed and told her she was being silly. He didn't hear the whispers in the night, the rustling of unseen creatures in the shadows. But one night, as Jenna lay trembling in her bed, she felt something brush against her arm. It was cold and clammy, and filled her with a sense of dread she could not explain. And then, she heard the voice. It was a voice unlike any she had ever heard before, a deep, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. And it spoke to her in words she could not understand, words that filled her with a sense of terror she could not describe. Jenna knew she had to leave. She packed her bags in the dead of night, fleeing the house and all its dark secrets. As Jenna drove away from the house, she felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had escaped the nightmare that had taken hold of her life, and she was finally free. But as she drove down the dark, winding road, Jenna saw something move in the rearview mirror. It was just a fleeting glimpse, a shadowy figure that seemed to be keeping pace with her car. Jenna tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The figure kept pace with her, growing closer and closer with each passing moment. Jenna could feel its cold, clammy breath on the back of her neck, and the hairs on her arms stood on end as she heard the voice again, speaking in words she could not understand. Suddenly, the car swerved off the road, crashing into a tree. Jenna's world went black as the car spun out of control, and she felt something cold and clammy wrap around her neck. She tried to scream, but no sound came out as she felt herself being dragged out of the car and into the darkness. Jenna woke up in a dark room, unsure of how much time had passed. She tried to move, but found that she was bound to a chair, unable to free herself. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out the shapes of strange objects scattered around the room. The air was thick with the smell of decay and rot. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same shadowy figure that had been following her in the car, and it was now standing before her, staring at her with cold, empty eyes. Jenna tried to speak, but her voice was hoarse and weak. The figure spoke to her in the same guttural growl she had heard before, and this time she could understand the words. They were words of power and darkness, words that promised her everything she had ever wanted in exchange for her soul. Jenna tried to resist, to break free of her bonds, but the figure was too strong. Its power flowed through her, filling her with a dark energy that she had never felt before. As the figure released her, Jenna realized that she was no longer the same person she had been before. She had been touched by something ancient and terrible, and it had left its mark on her. From that day on, Jenna wandered the earth, searching for the answers to the questions that plagued her. She delved deep into the mysteries of the occult, seeking to understand the power that had consumed her. And although she never found the answers she was looking for, she continued to walk the dark path that had been set before her. And as for the house, it remained empty, abandoned by all who dared to enter its haunted halls. The dark shadows and strange noises still lingered there, a constant reminder of the horror that had taken place within its walls. And although the world had forgotten about the house and the secrets it held, Jenna knew that it would always be there, waiting for the next victim to fall under its dark spell.
The abandoned house on the edge of town had always been a source of fear for the locals. They whispered about it in hushed tones, warning their children to stay away. It stood there, looming over the street like a dark, ominous presence, its windows boarded up, the paint peeling from its walls. No one knew why the house had been abandoned or who its previous owners were, but everyone agreed that it was best to avoid it at all costs. But one day, a group of children dared each other to enter the house. They were eager to prove their bravery and show that they weren't afraid. They gathered in front of the house, heartbeats racing, and dared each other to knock on the door. At first, there was only silence. But then they heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from inside. They froze, unsure of what to do next. But the curiosity got the best of them, and they decided to investigate. As they entered the house, they could feel the weight of its history bearing down on them. The air was thick and musty, and the only light came from the dim rays of sunlight that managed to filter through the boarded-up windows. They explored the first floor, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It was only when they ventured up the stairs that things started to get creepy. The stairs creaked with every step they took, and the floorboards groaned beneath their weight. And then, they heard it, a faint whispering sound coming from one of the rooms. They followed the sound, and it led them to a small room with a single rocking chair in the center. The chair was moving back and forth, as if someone was sitting in it. But the room was empty. They were about to leave when they heard the sound of children's laughter coming from another room. They followed the sound, but as they opened the door, the laughter stopped abruptly. The room was completely empty, except for a single, tattered teddy bear lying on the floor. Suddenly, they heard the sound of footsteps coming from upstairs. The children froze, paralyzed with fear. The footsteps grew louder and closer until they were right outside the door. The handle turned slowly, and the door creaked open. But there was nothing there. No one. Only the sound of a faint whispering voice that seemed to be coming from all around them. They ran out of the house, their hearts racing and their minds filled with terror. From that day on, no one dared to enter the abandoned house again. The children never spoke of what they saw or heard, but they knew that something haunted that house. Something that didn't want to be disturbed or forgotten. Something that still lingered there, waiting for the next brave soul to enter its doors. As the children ran out of the house, they were laughing and shouting with excitement. They couldn't believe they had actually dared to enter the abandoned house and come out unscathed. But as they were catching their breaths outside, they heard a loud crash coming from inside the house. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. But then they heard a child's voice calling out from inside. "Hey, you guys! Come check this out!" Curiosity got the best of them, and they ran back inside the house. They found the source of the noise. A group of kids their age had entered the house from the other side. They were laughing and joking, oblivious to the fear that had gripped the other children only moments before. Together, the two groups explored the abandoned house, finding hidden rooms and secret passages. They laughed and played games, forgetting their fears and enjoying the thrill of adventure. As they left the house, they all agreed that it had been the most fun they had ever had. And they promised to come back and explore it again, together. From that day on, the abandoned house became a popular spot for the children of the town. They would come and play, daring each other to explore its dark corners and hidden secrets. And they always left with stories to tell and memories to cherish.